Remember this scene from last year's Dakar? Where the front suspension of a HOTO motorcycle simply collapsed? A scene you've probably never seen before it. Did you ever wonder, what bike was that? What is a HOTO?
Straight away, I can tell you it's not a Kove, it's not a KTM. More importantly, neither is it a replica of any established brands.
This is a company that apparently came out of nowhere. I wanted to find out more things about them. What is that bike and who are the people behind it? I was curious, but digging through its story proved to be a little tricky.
So, follow me on this journey. Let's try pinpoint the origins of the HOTO Rally Bike.
Starting with the obvious, and that's their 2025 participation. This was a brand new team and motorcycle, last year debuting with 3 riders on board. Fang Xiangliang, a Chinese native, was an ex-Kove rider the year before. Similar to him, Xavier Flick used to also race for Kove. Finally, you had Arunas Gerasnikas, 2 times Malemoto winner, and he
had nothing to do with Kove actually. That was the lineup, but their bike's performance during the rally had some question marks around it.
For example, Xavier's machine broke down just 25 kilometers away from the finish line of a stage. A teammate had to stop by and give him a tow to the bivouac. According to an Instagram post by Dovatek, their swing arms were made of what I would describe as soft cheese. The team had to swap them almost daily, a ridiculous amount for any race bike at Dakar. Finally, in stage 9, Arunas had the collapsed incident I showed earlier.
He was forced to ride for 280 kilometers on what was, in essence, a lowrider, fixed suspension race bike.
Looking at these issues doesn't portray HOTO in too warm of a light. It's easy to assume they're just a cheap knockoff copycat of other motorcycles. A prototype, seemingly taking its durability inspiration from Lego Technic. They probably just used cheap components and didn't prepare much. Recently in Dakar, we've seen frames splitting apart on experimental motorcycles, and HOTO did build their own chassis and swing arm. From that point of view, looking at that issue, you'd be right. That was a bad design. Their own bad design.
But this is where my investigation took a bit of a turn. I started off with the same preconception, and yet, let's take that collapsed suspension issue.
In leaked photos from their preparations, you could see the team running a set of forks with Honda logos on them. What this tells me is they were planning on using a Showa setup. Now, looking at their official release video, you'll see the big, bold KYB stickers. In fact, if you look at 2 of their bikes from Dakar, those KYB stickers are still there.
My point here, HOTO didn't use cheap knockoff components. They grabbed some of the best, and even employed an Italian suspension tuner to adjust the final setups. By that logic, was it a HOTO issue or a KYB one?
Then you look at the engine problems they faced in the desert, which begs an obvious question. What power unit were they using? When browsing initial pictures, it's easy to jump to the assumption that it's a Kove clone. They come from the same country, so it would make sense. But if you look closer, that engine looks nothing like the one used by Kove. In fact, it bears curious similarity to a KTM unit. It turns out, this wasn't a KTM copy. It was an actual Austrian engine, same ones used by their own rally replicas.
According to some sources, in fact, for 2025, HOTO used standard out-of-the-box KTM engines, wiring and ECUs.
That's my point. If they had engine problems, yet again, I don't think they were to blame for it, because it wasn't their engine. Looking at these details, you start realizing that, actually, HOTO had quite a solid run through last year's Dakar, and that only makes the mystery thicker.
Look, nobody knew who they were. It's not just that the Western markets hadn't heard about them, they didn't exist the year before.
Aruna said himself, at the start of the rally, the HOTO bike and factory were roughly 6 months old. In 2024, when Xavier first got in contact with the Chinese, the bike was just a dream, a drawing on a piece of paper. This company basically built an entire motorcycle with a bespoke chassis from scratch in a matter of months? How on earth was it possible? Studying the motorcycles a bit closer, you start to notice a pattern. As a new company, there are many solid, off-the-shelf components you can purchase. Engines are easy to source, so are wheels, brakes, and suspension. What's not easy to source is a frame. That's way more individual. So that's the main aspect that HOTO engineers had to focus on. That's why these bikes ended up featuring Scott steering dampers, KTM-specific Akrapovic exhausts,
since their power unit setup was in essence a KTM, and dual radiator setups just like the modern-day Orange Rally replicas, all from reputable existing brands.
What they ended up with was a solid, trustful package. They didn't go for reinventing the wheel, they just changed the essentials to make it their own. Arunas even mentioned the HOTO felt lighter than the KTMs he had ridden in the past.
Now, okay, Arunas was a factory rider for the Chinese manufacturer, so take that with a grain of salt. What's fascinating is, at the start of the rally, you saw the free riders on top of their bikes.
Curious thing, those motorcycles were the only free the company had ever produced. All HOTO motorcycles were sitting there, a few feet away from each other. Apparently, some were freshly assembled right before reaching Saudi. From the outside, this looked like a rushed effort, a push that only barely managed to get done on time. More evidence of this is if we look at how Arunas got to ride for them. He had been hired a couple years before by some HOTO guys to run a race for them. That's before the HOTO bike was even a dream. Last year, in October, that's when he found out he was going to race on a HOTO in Dakar.
Our rider only had a couple test days on the new bike before having to line up at the start.
At this point, I had an idea of what that bike was, who was riding it, and how it came to be. This leaves us with an important question. Who is HOTO?
And this is the point in the video where things get tricky, because there seems to be no information on them. Still, we can piece together some things. Take the name. HOTO is a phonetic rendition of the Chinese word for camel.
This led me to a company name listed by some Chinese websites called Chongqing Red Camel Power Technology. In my internet search, I also stumbled upon Chongqing HOTO Motor Technology, a UK-based company that registered a trademark for HOTO Motor.
This trademark applied for motorcycles and racing vehicles, so that checks out. Curiously though, it was filed days before the Dakar rally.
I felt like I was going somewhere, but the path led nowhere. None of these companies have any records, there seems to be no information of them. I was stuck. But then, I came across a breakthrough. In their teaser video, HOTO said they went from HOTO Rally to HOTO Motor. Basically, from a rally team to a manufacturer. But if we look at that team pictured in the video, they are called Red Camel Rally. Notice the camel reference?
Looking into this team didn't yield much, until something did and helped me find a rough inception point.
On a freelancing website, we notice an ad posted by a Chinese individual. He was looking for a logo for a rally team, Red Camel Rally. Not long after, the same individual posted again, now with a new idea. The thing is, the winning logo is exactly the logo used by the team in HOTO's video. And what's helpful here, this logo was made about 3 years ago.
This tells me something. The project didn't really start 6 months before Dakar. Most likely, there was an existing team, and afterwards that team converted into manufacturing their own motorcycles.
Apparently, this team had some success in local Chinese rallies, but crucially, back then, they were running KTM rally replicas and Kove 450s. You know, when you look at it, so many aspects are familiar. A lot of it looks similar to another Chinese manufacturer that encountered a breakthrough, Kove. And in fact, while the bikes might not have anything in common, the companies most likely do. First, HOTO's 2025 general manager used to be a manager at Kove the year before. Allegedly, and this is not confirmed.
In 2024, when Kove's CEO left the company, he took some engineers with him. They went to work on another venture, but around the same time, it seems like other people departed Kove and jumped on working on HOTO. Nowadays, apparently, a lot of their core development team are ex-Kove employees.
Thanks to a user called MyWay on ADV Rider, I noticed something. HOTO is based in Chongqing, China, the same city as Kove. But not only are they in the same area, their factories are a 12-minute drive apart. That's less than 5 kilometers. Walking distance from each other. So HOTO might be a new, different company, but the brains behind them have been added before. Going back to that 2025 edition of Dakar, ultimately, HOTO got a top 7 as their best result. Sure, it was a short stage, one where a lot of the top guys stopped pushing in order to get a better starting position the following day. But still, that's a top 7. Add to that, all 3 motorcycles got to the finish line. For a manufacturer that just 6 months before didn't even have a working motorcycle, that's impressive.
And look, they didn't stop there. In fact, they said that after using the KTM power plant for 2025, the team was going to switch to another domestic one, as in a Chinese engine.
According to some sources, that's exactly what they plan to run during the upcoming rally, and in fact, they already tested it during a national event, the Taklimakan Rally. Here, HOTO took the entire podium. Sure, most top-level riders and international factory teams weren't there, but it's promising. There is one last piece of the puzzle you need to understand. Look, the only motorcycles these guys have ever built are their 2025 Dakar bikes and the new 2026 prototypes. If you look at pictures of their factory, pictures taken just months before the 2025 Dakar, you'll see a building that seems suited for large-scale operations. Indeed, these bikes weren't manufactured in a shed. What this tells me is simple. Sooner or later, HOTO will become commercial and sell something. In fact, if you look at Xavier's Instagram, he did mention that HOTO was planning on selling their rally bike to the public.
Does this strategy remind you of any other manufacturer? Yeah, it does. A strategy that worked wonders for Kove, and it seems like HOTO are taking a similar approach.
The whole point of Dakar for them is testing, making sure the bikes are up to par, comparing with the best and making a name for themselves. I do wonder, this seems like a company that completely skipped the startup phase.
It's like giving birth to a 10-year-old newborn. I could ask the question, where did the funds come from? But let's be real, given their origins, we'll probably never know.
Look, this is far from the complete picture. I wish I could tell the whole story, but I can't. Even piecing together this puzzle was a far from trivial job. We still don't know how they developed a frame in such a short amount of time, or who they actually are. How did they decide to manufacture motorcycles? That being said, I do like the fact that they seem straightforward. They publicly admitted to using KTM engines. They don't seem to be copycats.
It's a new entry in the rallying world, new competition. And as long as it's fair competition, I'm all for it.
Let's see what HOTO can do in a few months at Dakar 2026. Thanks for watching.